Welcome back to our revision lesson on the history of life. We're going to carry on looking at some different types of questions that you can be asked on this particular section. Many of these questions have got quite a complicated introduction, but you just need to underline, okay, it's a bar graph, and the thickness of the bars represent the number of different types of animals, and the bottom of the bars indicate the period when that group arose. So let's actually have a look at this diagram. On the side here, we've basically got our geological time scale with some years that are given. At the bottom is a variety of different living organisms, and what these purple things are, it's like a bar. It's almost like a bar graph, but what happens is the width of the bar actually gives you an indication of the biodiversity. In other words, how many different types of mollusks. And if we have a look, what I've just been outlining is mollusks, and there's actually quite a lot of different types of mollusks. If we have a look here, echinoderms, those are sea urchins, and there are not a lot of different types of that. Okay, so it's looking at how many animals of each different type existed, and as you'll notice that as we go up the geological time scale, the size of the bars changes. Okay, and one of the biggest change in the size of the bars occurs here at the end of the Permian period. And we shouldn't be surprised at that, because we already know that at the end of the Permian period, there was this huge mass extinction which killed off many different types of species. Now, what can you be expected to extract from a diagram like this? So let's have a look at the questions which could be asked. Okay, first of all, simple reading off the graph. Which three animal groups show the greatest diversity at the present time? So the present time, that's the line at the top, all the way along. And we're looking for the ones which show the greatest diversity, and that is chordates, which are vertebrates, mollusks, and arthropods. The next question asks, which animal group became extinct during the Paleozoic era? So we go to the graph, and then we have a look. Here is the Paleozoic era. If an animal group has become extinct, it means the lines will stop, and there's only one group of animals that was present during the Paleozoic period, which is not present now, and they are called Graptolites. Now, you don't need to know anything about them. You don't need to know what they look like. You just need to be able to extract the information from the source material you were given. The next question, which animal group arose most recently? So we have a look, and remember this is geological time. Which animal group arose most recently? And that is the chordates, or the vertebrate group. All the other groups of animals were present much, much earlier. So that's the chordates, which is the vertebrate group. Next question, which two animal groups arose in the Cambrian period? So you need to find the Cambrian period and find out which two animal groups arose in the Cambrian period. And if we have a look here, right at the bottom of the Cambrian period, in the beginning, when invertebrates were ruling what Earth was like at that time, those are the mollusks and the arthropods. Those are the earliest groups that arose. Next, what effect did the mass extinction at the end of the Permian have on most of the animal groups? So we have a look, there's our mass extinction at the end of the Permian, and if you have a look, almost every animal group narrowed at that particular time. The group which seemed to have the least effect on was the chordates or the vertebrates. So what effect? It reduced the diversity. In other words, it reduced the number of different types of animals of that group on Earth. Then another question, also you can extract directly from the graph, which group has had the most consistent diversity? Now, the most consistent diversity means it hasn't had very, very big bulges and very, very narrow parts. So you have a look at the group which has the bar which actually varies the least. And if you have a look, that's them, the sponges. They have, probably because they live in water, they have not been as badly affected as some of the other groups. Then, next question. You'll notice that most of these questions are linked to the geological timescale. They just show different aspects. Okay, and this one is similar to the previous one. It's also looking at the different time periods, except this is looking at the development of the vertebrate groups. The different types of vertebrates, for example, reptiles, fish, amphibians, birds, and mammals. And again, the width of the column refers to the number of species. So the wider the column, the more variety there is. And if you turn your head sideways, it's actually quite similar to the previous question that we had a look at. Before we even start looking at the questions, this gives us an indication of how many different reptiles were present in the Mesozoic era. It also gives us an indication when birds actually arose, because birds arose in the Mesozoic era. They weren't present before then. It also shows us that the amphibians, at the end of the Paleozoic era, amphibians had a wide diversity, but things have changed since then because they now have fewer different types. So once you've understood what this source material is telling you, we can have a look at a little bit more detail of that. So this is just a bigger picture so that you can see a little bit more clearly what is actually going on. Now, let's look at the questions. Starting off with an easy question. Time is measured in the unit MYA. And what does this stand for? Million years ago. Then, looking at the graph, it says which group of vertebrates is the oldest. And if you have a look, the group which originated earlier, before all the others, that is obviously the fish. Then, which group currently has the least? And that is the thickness there. That's the amphibian group. And which group currently has the most different species? And that is there. That is the mammals. And we know they have the most different species because their bar is the widest. Next question. which groups existed on Earth during the Paleozoic era. And you know, if you get a question like this, draw lines all over it because it helps you work out which animals were present. So if we look at this, if we draw a line at the end of the Paleozoic era, which 3 organisms were present? Fish, amphibians, and not a lot, but there were some reptiles. Then, if we have a look, birds are the ones that have been around for the least amount of time. And that shows that is when birds developed. So birds developed sometime in the middle of the Mesozoic era, at the beginning of the Cretaceous period. And scientists actually think birds evolved from ancestors which were like dinosaurs. Then again, looking at the graph, which group was the most abundant at the beginning of the Cretaceous period? We draw a line, and that's obviously the reptiles. Then, which group was not present in the early Cretaceous? That's the birds. And which animal group had the lowest diversity at the end of the Cretaceous? And remember, lowest diversity at the end of the Cretaceous, it means the narrowest bar. And that was the reptiles. Then, lastly, which groups of vertebrates developed from the common ancestor? Okay, those lines linking the different groups together, they're referring to those common ancestors, like the fossils we talked about as transitional fossils. And from that common ancestor, there are 3 groups developing, namely mammals, birds, and reptiles. Hopefully by now you're getting the hang of this, because there's one more different type of question that we need to have a look at. And we're going to have a look at it now. Okay, this particular, it's also a graph, and it shows the rate of extinction. In other words, how many organisms became extinct at a particular time. So it's also got the geological time scale along the bottom, but this time it's a graph, and the graph shows the rate of extinction. In other words, how many families became extinct. And if we have a look, there are peaks in the extinction rate, and these peaks obviously correlate with our mass extinctions, because that's what the definition of a mass extinction is. Many species become extinct at the same time. You can be asked to read information off the graph. Okay, first of all, it says identify the era with the shortest duration. So if we have a look here, obviously, shortest duration is the Cenozoic era. Is this the... Okay. Okay, so we...
Let's just go back so that we can review the answer. Yeah.
Okay. So
you just want to end with that one because the time is up.
oh.
Yes. So you can do the rest of those answers.
Those 3, okay, and then I'll just tell them that there are more questions, but it will be in the notes accompanying this video.
And 3, 2, 1.
Shortest duration, the Cenozoic period. The longest duration, the Paleozoic era. And the era with the fewest geological periods is the Cenozoic era. Now, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but there are some more questions that are on the notes that will accompany this recording. So please have a look. All the answers are there as well. I sincerely hope that you have found my explanations helpful, and when you get to exams, you will find the History of Life section very easy to do. See you next time.